Thank God for the American jury system. From the moment we got arrested on the Falcone murder, my uncle was working on ways to beat the case. The first thing we did was put together our defense team. Harold Garber, who was around us and was very close with my uncle, would represent my uncle in the trial. I used Edwin Jacobs, and Lawrence used a Philadelphia lawyer named Bobby Simone. Bobby made a name for himself representing a lot of made guys in Philadelphia, and him and my uncle had become friendly. Jury selection was set to begin in early September 1980. I had moved into the Claridge Hotel and Casino during the trial, so that I wouldn't be distracted. This trial meant everything to us. It was literally life or death for us. The state of New Jersey v. Nicodemo Scarfo et al. Got underway in the Atlantic County Courthouse on Main Street in Mays Landing, approximately 15 miles away from Atlantic City. The prosecutor was a man named Jeffrey Blitz, and we knew he hated us. The judge was a man named William Miller, and they had brought him in from another county to try the case. In the beginning of the case, the judge granted a motion by one of the television stations that would have allowed the trial to be broadcast live on television each day. At the time, this was unheard of. That's how big this trial was. I remember pulling up the first day of the trial. We were in my uncle's Cadillac. A man named Ed Harrell, who worked for Bobby Simone as a private investigator, was driving the car, and Bobby was in the front seat. Ed was an absolute gentleman. He was a black guy and had been involved with Martin Luther King Jr. in the 60s. How he ended up with Bobby, or with me, my uncle, and Lawrence, I'll never know. As we're pulling up, there were news cameras and reporters everywhere. My uncle said, "Jesus Christ, Bobby, are they here for us?" And Bobby said, "I'm afraid so." Ed dropped us off in the front of the courthouse, and we walked through the crowd. Bobby was saying no comment as we pushed our way through. Inside, we met Harold Garber and Ed Jacobs. Now, when it comes time for opening arguments, Harold was the first to go. He was representing my uncle. He got up and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Harold Garber, and I represent Nicodemo Scarfo. The evidence in this case will show that Mr. Scarfo is not guilty. Thank you." And then he sat down. That was his whole opening argument. If my uncle could have killed him right there, he would have. Ed Jacobs and Bobby Simone used their opening arguments to destroy the credibility of Joe Salerno, who was the state's star witness. 9 months removed from that fateful night in Margate, where Philip Leonetti pumped 2 bullets into Vincent Falcone, Joe Salerno and his family had already been whisked away from Brigantine and placed in the Witness Protection Program and relocated to Topeka, Kansas, where they were given new names and new identities. Now, wearing a bulletproof vest and under the guard of U.S. Marshals carrying machine guns, Joe Salerno was back in town. I remember when Joe Salerno took the witness stand, we were trying to ice him, trying to scare him, but he never once looked in our direction the whole time he testified, and he was no less than 10 feet away from us. The prosecutor had him tell the story of how he met us and how I had loaned him money and how he had given my uncle the guns. He told them everything. That night we all went out to dinner. Me, my uncle, Lawrence, Harold, Bobby, Ed Jacobs, and I think Chucky was with us. We went to Caesar's. We were discussing the best ways to attack Joe Salerno's credibility. We were all very focused on winning this trial. It was as if nothing else was going on around us. Well, except for the thing with Johnny Keys. Johnny Keys Simone had been a made member of the Bruno crime family for a number of years and operated out of the Trenton area. Simone, who was 70 years old, was a distant cousin of Bruno's and had formed a close relationship with the Gambino crime family in New York through a Trenton-based Gambino capo named Nicky Russo, who reported directly to Gambino boss Paul Castellano and had been one of the Yardville Nine in the early 70s with Angelo Bruno and Nicky Scarfo. Simone was sending messages to Castellano through Russo that he was interested in taking out Phil Testa and becoming boss of the Philadelphia mob, much the same way Antonio Tony Bananas Caponegro had tried to do with Angelo Bruno. But Caponegro and Bruno were now both dead. Word gets back to my uncle that Johnny Keys was plotting against Phil Testa and was doing so through the Gambinos. My uncle reports this to Bobby Manna in New York, and Bobby says he is going to look into it. A few days later, Bobby sent word down that he is sending a kid down named Sammy Gravano, who is with the Gambinos, to talk to us about it. He tells us we can trust him, that this Sammy is La Cosa Nostra and respected by all of the families in New York. Sammy was known as a hitter, a killer, and Bobby said to my uncle and me, "This guy is your kind of guy." So one night Sammy comes down and we meet him inside the lobby lounge at Bally's Park Place for a couple of drinks to get acquainted, and then we take him to Angelo's for dinner. It's me, him, and my uncle. He tells us, "Look, I don't know this guy Johnny Keys, and quite frankly, I don't give a fuck. He's trying to make problems for you and your family, then me and my crew are going to make problems for him. I got the okay from Paul to whack this guy out for talking treason against your boss. Just give me some time, and it will be done. Me and my crew are going to handle this guy personally." I could tell that my uncle was impressed by him and the manner in which he carried himself. He was very respectful and very straightforward. There was no bullshit with him. We ended up having a very nice dinner and spent a couple of hours talking about La Cosa Nostra. Sammy knew this thing inside and out. That was the first time I met Sammy the Bull, and it wouldn't be the last. A few weeks later, the bullet-ridden body of Johnny Keys Simone was found in a Staten Island landfill. The hit team, led by the up-and-coming Gambino family hitman, Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano, had kidnapped Simone from the parking lot of a posh country club on the outskirts of Trenton and drove him to a secluded area in Staten Island and pumped several bullets into the back of his head. When we heard that Sammy's crew had killed Johnny Keys, we were relieved. It gave us the opportunity to focus our attention on our trial. Now, this trial was live on TV every day. We had the highest ratings in the area. At the time, there was a show on TV called Shogun, which was the #1 show, and we beat them in the ratings. But Joe Salerno was telling the jury everything about the night we killed Vince. Every detail. How I pulled out the gun, how I shot him, what I said. He gave the jury a play-by-play of everything that happened. I thought to myself, we're dead. We're finished. When it's time for cross-examination, Harold and Ed Jacobs did a good job of going at him, but Lawrence's lawyer, Bobby Simone, destroyed him. Bobby made Joe Salerno look like a liar, even though every word he was saying was the truth. Now, Joe Salerno was the state's whole case. If we were able to neutralize him, we had a shot at winning. Now, when the state rested, we had a meeting. It was all the defendants and all the lawyers. We were in one of those little conference rooms in the courthouse. Bobby Simone said, "I think I can win a motion to dismiss on behalf of Lawrence based on the fact that he didn't pull the trigger or order the murder. If I make the motion and win, me and Lawrence are out of the case." Now, like I said before, Bobby was the best lawyer I have ever seen try a case. He had destroyed Joe Salerno on the stand. I wanted him in the case for closing arguments, and so did my uncle. My uncle asked the lawyers to step outside for a few minutes so that me, him, and Lawrence could talk privately. My uncle said, "What do you want to do, Lawrence? Do you want Bobby to do that motion for you?" Now, Lawrence knows if Bobby does the motion, he's probably going to win it, and he would go home free. Lawrence knows that I am on the hook more than anyone because Joe Salerno ID'd me as the killer. Lawrence turns to me and he says, "What do you think, Philip? What should I do?" Now, I'm torn, because if I tell Lawrence to do the motion and he wins, Bobby Simone can't do the closing argument, and I thought my best chance of winning was Bobby speaking to the jury for all of us. The flip side is, Lawrence is my friend, and if he can get out of this thing, then it's better for him. I say, "I don't know, Lawrence, that's a tough one." Lawrence says to my uncle, "Nick, what do you think?" My uncle says, "I'd hate to lose, Bobby, but you do what you think is best for you." We bring the lawyers back in, and Bobby says to Lawrence, "So what are we doing about the motion?" And Lawrence looks at me and my uncle and says, "Fuck it, no motion. We win together, or we lose together. I was so relieved. I hugged Lawrence and kissed him on the cheek. My uncle did too. We went back into court feeling like we had a good chance at winning. After closing arguments, we were feeling really good. Bobby was amazing. Harold waited until the end to tell me and my uncle that he knew one of the jurors, a guy who was a liquor salesman, and that the guy would not vote against us. So at best, Harold said the jury would be hung. My uncle said, "You knew that this whole time, and you wait until now to tell us?" This was the second time during the trial that my uncle looked like he wanted to kill Harold. I remember Bobby said, "Is that why your opening argument was only 30 seconds?" And everyone laughed. A few minutes later, they told us that the jury had reached a unanimous verdict. We all stopped laughing, and everyone got very serious. We thanked the lawyers, and they rushed off into the courtroom. Then me, my uncle, and Lawrence spoke privately for a few minutes, and my uncle said, "I think we're going to beat this thing." We all hugged and kissed each other on the cheek, and we went into the courtroom. My God, the place was packed. You couldn't even move. There were 1,000,000 reporters trying to get in, but all the detectives who had chased us over the years had taken up most of the seats. We had a few supporters of our own that came every day to cheer us on. There must have been 20 sheriff's officers all over the courtroom. It seemed like we were waiting forever for the judge to come out and read the verdict. Then someone yelled, "All rise!" And here comes the judge. You could cut the tension with a knife. I've never been more scared in my entire life. First, they read the charges off against Lawrence, and they say not guilty. Then they read my uncle's charges, and they say not guilty. Then they get to mine, and they say, Philip Leonetti, not guilty. Me, my uncle, and Lawrence all shake hands with the lawyers, and you should have seen the look on the faces of the prosecutor and the cops. My God, they looked like they were going to cry. As we were leaving, one of the reporters asked my uncle, "Is there anything that you'd like to say?" And my uncle looked into the television camera and said, "Thank God for the American jury system and an honest jury." I was standing right behind him when he said it, and you can see me smiling on TV. It felt like the weight of the world was off my shoulders. That night we had a big party on Georgia Avenue, and everyone came to celebrate. All the lawyers and their families came. Chucky was there, the Blade was there, Saul Kane, Vince Sausto, Salvi, all the guys from the neighborhood, and all the knockaround guys who were with us around Atlantic City. They all came down. At some point during the party, my uncle pulls me and Lawrence aside and said, "We got away with murder. We are very, very lucky. We got to be more careful from now on." But within weeks of the not guilty verdict, little Nicky was back to his murderous ways. Sindone was one of the guys who was involved in the plot to kill Ange, and him and my uncle hated each other. My uncle told Phil Testa that Sindone was a snake and that he couldn't be trusted. Phil Testa agreed. So we set him up, and Salvi took him to a house in South Philadelphia where Frank Monte was waiting inside to see him. When Sindone was shaking hands with Frank Monte, Chucky Merlino shot him in the head and killed him. Chucky hit him 3 times in the back of the head, and they dumped him in an alley behind a store in South Philadelphia. Phil Testa immediately sent word out that Sindone's entire operation was to be split between his killers, Salvi Testa, Chucky Merlino, and Frank Monte. Sindone's top lieutenant, Joseph Chicky Ciancalini, who was now aligned with Testa and Scarfo, would also receive a piece of the action and would oversee what remained of Sindone's crew. The year was almost over, but little Nicky's killing spree wasn't. John McCullough was the head of the Roofers Union in Philadelphia. He was a big Irish guy from northeast Philadelphia, and he had been very close to Ange. He was the guy Ange wanted to let organize the unions in Atlantic City instead of my uncle. Now, my uncle hated John McCullough. When I say hated, I mean he absolutely detested him. He used to call him that big Irish cocksucker, or the crew cut, things like that. Now, when Ange was alive, John McCullough was untouchable because he was with Ange. But with Ange gone, John McCullough was vulnerable. My uncle starts telling Phil Testa, We gotta kill this guy McCullough. He's interfering in the unions in Atlantic City, and he's costing me money. So Phil Testa gives my uncle the okay. When McCullough lost his bid to take over the unions through Ange, he started causing trouble in Local 54. He was trying to break the union, and it was costing us a lot of money. My uncle went to Raymond Long John Martirano, who was a member of our family, and who was close to McCullough, and told him, "I want you to help us kill this guy. He's no good." Long John says, "I'll do whatever you want me to do, Nick." This was a way to test a guy's loyalty, and at the same time eliminate a rival and show the guy that you were the power, that you were the muscle. This is how my uncle was. He wanted to kill everybody. Everyone was petrified of my uncle, because with him, it was kill, kill, kill. He didn't give a fuck. There was no talking. Even though Phil Testa was the boss, no one in our family was more powerful than my uncle. When the guys from New York wanted to discuss business with our family, they came and saw my uncle. When it was time to whack somebody out, it was my uncle who was calling the shots. He would determine who was going to die and who was going to kill them. So my uncle tells Long John, "I want you to use Al Didone on this thing." Now, Al Didone was part of the bartenders union out of Camden, the one with Ralph Natale, which was the other union that Ange was pushing to get into Atlantic City. My uncle figures this is a way of testing Al Didone's loyalty as well, since at one time that union was opposed to my uncle. He tells Long John that he will make Al Didone a business agent for Local 54 if he helps out with the killing, and if he doesn't, that he will kill him instead. As crazy as my uncle was, I guess you can say there was a method to his madness. On Tuesday, December 16, 1980, a delivery van pulled up outside the home of Philadelphia Roofers union boss John McCullough in the Bustleton section of North Philadelphia. The delivery man was carrying poinsettias, the bright red flowers that are synonymous with Christmas, which was only 9 days away. McCullough's wife answered the door and let the delivery man inside the home, and he placed 2 plants on the kitchen table. Standing a few feet away, talking on a telephone that was attached to the wall, was John McCullough. McCullough nodded to the delivery man, and the delivery man nodded back. The delivery man told Mrs. McCullough that he had 1 more plant in the truck, and that he would be right back. John McCullough saw that his wife had $2 in her hand to tip the man upon his return, and put his hand over the phone and said, "It's Christmas time. Give him 3. When the delivery man reappeared, he was carrying the 3rd poinsettia and placed it on the table with the others. Without hesitation, he pulled out a .22 caliber handgun and fired 6 times into the head and neck of John McCullough at close range. The union boss slid to the floor as a pool of blood surrounded him. McCullough's wife screamed in horror as the gunman very calmly left the house, got back into his van, and drove away. John McCullough would no longer pose a threat to Nicky Scarfo's control over the unions in Atlantic City. He was dead. The night they killed McCullough, it was all over the news, the top story. My uncle was very happy until he learned that Long John didn't kill McCullough himself. He had used a civilian, some kid named Willard Moran. As for Al Didone, he always maintained he had nothing to do with the hit. My uncle went nuts. "This motherfucker used a civilian? Some fucking Irish kid? Jesus Christ!" Now my uncle wants to kill Long John for using this Moran kid to do the hit, but Phil Testa calms him down. He says, "Nick, if we keep killing everybody, there won't be anyone left." That year alone, Angelo Bruno, Antonio Tony Bananas Caponegro, Alfred Freddie Salerno, John Johnny Keys Simone, Frank the Barracuda Sindone, and John McCullough had all been murdered as part of a mob power struggle. And that's how 1980, the bloodiest year in the history of the Philadelphia mob, ended. Early in 1981, we learned that the U.S. Attorney's Office in Camden was going to indict my uncle for illegal possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. The case stemmed from a search warrant that was executed when they came to arrest us for the Falcone murder. They found a small .22 in one of my uncle's bedroom drawers, We knew it was coming, and we expected my uncle to do some time. And with this time, I was starting to get more involved in some of the other unions in Atlantic City. We controlled all of them. My uncle started giving me more responsibility now that I was made, and with the fact that he was likely going to prison at some point on the gun case. At this time, I started to make some inroads with a local politician named Mike Matthews, who wanted to become the mayor of Atlantic City. I had sent word to him that when the time was right, that he and I would meet, and we would discuss ways that we could help him get elected. I also helped make a guy we knew named Joe Pasquale, the chief of police in Atlantic City. We had the kind of power at that time where we could start a citywide strike with a single phone call and literally shut down the casinos. We also had the kind of power that if people didn't do what we told them to do, we'd kill them, and everyone knew that. That was one of the reasons my uncle was so big on the killings. When people knew that we are involved, all the games stopped, because they knew that we weren't fucking around. Around this time I got word that the president of one of the casinos wasn't going to sign a union contract with Local 54. I sent word to the president of the casino that if he didn't sign the contract that I personally would blow his brains out of his head. He signed the contract the next day. With little Nicky slowing down slightly in anticipation of a federal prison term on the gun case, his nephew, Philip Crazy Phil Leonetti, was stepping in and running the day-to-day operations in Atlantic City. While Scarfo and Leonetti were transitioning their power to the Jersey Shore, Philip Testa was losing his on the streets of South Philadelphia. Basically, Chicky Narducci was back to his old tricks, the same stuff he was doing with Ange, the plotting against Phil Testa. He now started doing with the underboss, Pete Casella. Narducci tells Casella that if they whack out Phil Testa, and Casella becomes the boss, that he would give Casella $1 million so he could retire to Florida, and he could name Chicky Narducci the boss. This is how bad Chicky Narducci wanted to be the boss. He was willing to pay $1 million for it. Now, Chicky had 2 tons of money. He had millions of dollars, but he didn't have no real power, and that's what he wanted. Now, Pete Casella doesn't have 30 cents to his name, so when Narducci offers him the $1 million, he goes for it, and him and Narducci start the plot to kill Phil Testa. After the McCullough hit, me and my uncle were pretty much staying in Atlantic City and focusing on our operation, on our business. Even though my uncle was consigliere, we weren't going to Philadelphia a lot, so we were kind of out of the loop with what Narducci and Casella were up to. Now, you gotta remember, since the day my uncle came home from Yardville, I was literally by his side every day, morning, noon, and night. Where he went, I went. This is going on 8 or 9 years at this point. All these meetings, all these killings, all of this plotting. I had been charged with murder twice. We had just beaten the Falcone case. I was literally exhausted. Now, during our trial, my uncle tells me and Lawrence, if we win this thing, I'm taking you guys to Florida. I gotta tell you, I needed that trip, and so did my uncle. In this life, it's not 9 to 5. It's 24/7, especially with my uncle. He never stopped. So one day at the office, my uncle tells me and Lawrence, let's go down there for a few days and relax. We'll get some sun. We'll have a good time. This was the best news I'd heard in years, right up there with beating the Falcone case. So we fly down to Miami, and we are staying in a suite at the original Diplomat Hotel, which was in Hollywood, Florida. You should have seen this place. It was a 5-star resort from top to bottom. Me, my uncle, and Lawrence would sit at the pool and just relax, have a few drinks, and then we'd eat at the best restaurants in town. Even my uncle was relaxing. He said, we need to get down here more often. This is the life. Now, the night we get back to Philadelphia, Chucky is waiting for us at the airport. He has a look on his face. My uncle says, what's the matter? What's going on? Chucky says, Phil Testa says he needs to see you right away, and it can't wait. I think it's the beef between him and Chicky. My uncle says, okay, let's go. And that was it. The vacation was over. We head over to Phil Testa's restaurant on Bank Street in Old City for a meeting, and when we get there, it's Phil Testa, Frank Monti, and Salvi sitting in a back booth, It's me, my uncle, Chucky, and Lawrence, and we sit down in the booth. Phil Testa says, "Nick, thanks for coming. I wouldn't have called you here if it wasn't urgent." My uncle says, "What's going on?" So Phil Testa starts off by saying, "I think Chicky's making a move against me. I've been hearing things in the street, and on top of that, he came to see me last week and asked to borrow $50,000. Now, before we killed Sindone, Phil Testa borrowed $50,000 from him. That's how greedy these guys were. They'd borrow the money knowing the guy was going to get killed, and then they wouldn't have to pay the money back. That was the move that these guys did. Now, everybody knows the last thing Chicky Narducci needs is another $50,000. The guy is a multimillionaire. So Phil Testa is convinced that Chicky is doing to him what Phil Testa did to Sindone. My uncle says, "We gotta kill him. We gotta get him before he gets you." Phil Testa seems relieved. He says, "Thanks, Nick. I knew I could count on you." And he gives my uncle a kiss on the cheek. My uncle says, "We'll take a ride up tomorrow and figure this thing out. Don't worry about nothing." And then we drove back to Atlantic City. Our plan was to go back and see him the next day, but because of what happened a few hours later, that didn't happen. The explosion could be heard blocks away. Like an earthquake, it rocked an entire city. Dozens of police cars, fire trucks, and ambulances raced to the scene, as did dozens of people from the neighborhood, onlookers, many huddled together dressed in their pajamas, wearing sweatshirts and wrapped in blankets. After all, it was after 3 in the morning, and the air was crisp, permeated by the unmistakable scent of a fire that was slowly burning from within the smoldering heap that had once been the well-kept home of a man known to some as Philip Testa, but known to all as the Chicken Man, the boss of the Philadelphia mob. Within minutes, more than a half-dozen clean-shaven and nattily-dressed men, wearing navy blue flap jackets with the letters FBI emblazoned in bright yellow across their backs, were on the scene. Unlike most of the spectators present, these men, agents assigned to the FBI's organized crime unit, did not appear to have just woken up. It appeared quite the opposite. It appeared that these men never slept. As the crowd of curiosity seekers swelled behind the yellow crime scene tape, sleepy-eyed reporters joined the crowd, the lights from their television cameras illuminating the sky. Neighbors, friends, and family shrieked in horror when the gurney carrying a severely burned and mortally wounded Philip Testa was led from the rubble of his home to a nearby ambulance for the short trip to St. Agnes Hospital on Broad Street in the heart of South Philadelphia. The Chicken Man was dead, literally blown to pieces by a homemade bomb made of nails as he walked through the front door of his house after a late night out on the town. It was a brutal death for a brutal man that highlighted the ruthless and grisly dark side of a life often glamorized and romanticized. It was roughly 3 in the morning when Philip Testa returned to his home located on the 2100 block of Porter Street in South Philadelphia's posh Girard Estates neighborhood from picking up some late-night collections. He double-parked his car and made his way up his porch and to his front door. These would be the final steps of his life. If the 56-year-old Testa had been paying closer attention, he would have noticed the suspicious black Volkswagen van parked across the street from his house with a young South Philadelphia pizza maker and wannabe wise guy named Rocco Marinucci behind the wheel. Marinucci was known on the streets as Pete Casella's driver and protege. Even if Testa had realized what was going on around him, he probably couldn't have done much. Fate was already in motion. From the second Testa got out of his car, he was in the crosshairs. Underneath his porch was a makeshift bomb made up of carpenter's nails and 13 sticks of dynamite, rigged to a handheld detonator in the possession of Marinucci. Most likely, he didn't feel a thing. The explosion happened in an instant. As Testa reached for his front doorknob, Marinucci pushed a button and blew the Chicken Man into oblivion. Reverberations from the blast registered for miles. As the darkness of night gave way to the blinding bright light of dawn, Many would casually dismiss the event with a shrug as just another mob hit, as they read their Philadelphia Inquirer or their Daily News and sipped their morning coffee. But they were wrong. This was anything but just another mob hit. It was the death of a sitting mob boss, the second such killing that had taken place in the city of Philadelphia in less than a year, as a complex struggle over money and power became deadly. The city of brotherly love had become the city of brotherly blood. The following year, New Jersey-born American rock icon Bruce Springsteen would release a song about it, immortalizing the event in pop culture lore. In the underworld, the killing of a mob boss like Philip Testa was akin to the assassination of a president. Like the earthquake that it resembled, the death of Philip Testa would produce seismic ripple effects and shake the foundation of the underworld in South Philadelphia and Atlantic City to its very core. The ensuing chaos would last for the next 3 decades. It was maybe 3:30, 3:45 in the morning when I got the call from Salvi. He said, "Philip, they killed my father." I was in bed, and I remember sitting straight up when he said it. I said, "Jesus Christ, Salvi, what happened?" And he said, "There was a bomb at the house and they blew him up. Those motherfuckers blew him up." You could hear the sadness in his voice, but I also heard the anger, the rage. He said, "Philip, I swear on my mother's grave when I find out who did this." And then his voice trailed off. I said, "Salvi, try and get some sleep. Me and my uncle will be up there in a few hours, and we will figure things out." And he said, "Okay, Philip, you guys come to the house." And then we hung up. So I get out of bed and I walk next door to my uncle's apartment, and I go in and I wake him up. It was like 4 in the morning, and he is dead asleep. So I'm nudging him and saying, "Uncle Nick, wake up." And right away, the second he sees me, he knows something's wrong, and he says, "What happened?" And I told him. I said, "Salvi just called. His father got killed. They blew his house up with a bomb." Without hesitation, my uncle is out of bed, and I follow him into his kitchen. His wife comes in and makes us coffee, and my uncle is just sitting there, staring straight ahead. Neither one of us are saying anything. After a few minutes, he takes a sip of his coffee, and he leans in close to me, and he says, "Do you know what this means?" And I nodded my head, yes. I knew that with Phil Testa dead, one of 2 things was going to happen. Either the guys who killed him were going to try and kill us, or we were going to try and kill them. Whoever was left standing, us or them, would take control of the family, the Philadelphia La Cosa Nostra. We sat there for a few more minutes, and my uncle was just staring straight ahead, and I could tell by looking at him he had a million thoughts racing through his head. This was it. This was kill or be killed for us, and it was like he was computing all of these different scenarios in his mind. Who he could count on, who he had to watch, who he had to kill. He finished his coffee and got up from the table, and without saying a word, he started walking back to his bedroom. As he's walking away, he says, "I'm going back to bed for a few hours. Come down and get me around 10, and we will head up to Philadelphia." So I walk back over to my apartment, but my adrenaline is going and I can't get back to sleep. I'm lying there, and now my mind starts racing too. I started thinking of everything my uncle had taught me about this life since I was a little boy. All of the rules. I knew that death and murder were a part of our life. I started thinking of Ange, and how Caponegro had betrayed him, and now they were both dead. I thought about Vince Falcone, about how me and him killed Louis DeMarco together, and then I killed Vince. I thought about Phil Testa. I knew that Salvi or my uncle would kill whoever had killed him. The killings never stopped. I was thinking how in this life one day a guy is your friend, and the next day you're killing him or he's trying to kill you. This was what La Cosa Nostra was all about. But now the stakes were much, much higher. The March 15th, 1981 bombing death of Philip "Chicken Man" Testa was the second time in less than a year that the boss of the Philadelphia Atlantic City mob had been violently murdered with the assassination of longtime Don Angelo Bruno having occurred on March 21, 1980. With Bruno and Testa gone, Nicodemo, little Nicky Scarfo, was in prime position to assume control of the family and become boss, and his nephew, Philip Leonetti, his protege and heir apparent, was right by his side. Every day since he got out of Yardville, I was by his side. I drove him everywhere. Where he went, I went. I'd stay with him until he was in for the night, and I'd be there at whatever time he needed me the next day. That was my routine. That was my life in the beginning. And at 10 a.m. sharp, a few hours after the death of Philip Testa, Leonetti was dressed and ready to drive his uncle to Philadelphia to pay their respects to Salvi Testa and his family. Now, when I come down to get him, he's in a suit and tie. His hair is perfectly in place, and he seemed eager to get to Philadelphia. I don't think it was because he wanted to see Salvi and the family so much. I think it was because he knew guys like Pete Casella and Chicky Narducci would start making moves, and he wanted to be there so he could see who was doing what. My uncle says, "Get Lawrence and let's get on the road. I want to pick up Chucky at his house and then go see Salvi and his sister, and then we're going to get to the bottom of this thing and see what's going on." Now, I know that things are tense. I mean, they just killed the boss less than 12 hours ago. So I say to my uncle, "Do we need these?" And I make my hand like a gun. And he says, "If we do, we can get them up there," meaning Philadelphia. Remember, my uncle is out on bail on the gun possession case from the gun they found in his bedroom when they came to lock us up on the Falcone case. He knows that the cops know that we're driving up to Philadelphia. It's a 60-mile ride on the Atlantic City Expressway, a straight shot from Atlantic City right into South Philadelphia using the Walt Whitman Bridge. We could be pulled over and searched at any time. So my uncle is being extra cautious. "I don't need no more headaches with those motherfuckers," he said, meaning the law, and we got in the Cadillac and headed to Philadelphia. The news of the explosion that killed Philip Testa was the top story on local television, and rumors of who had been behind it began to circulate on the mob-infested streets of South Philadelphia. It takes us about an hour to drive up, and in the car no one is talking because we are always worried about listening devices. We get into the city, and we drive to Chucky's house, and he meets us outside. At the time, he was living around 9th and Jackson. We park the car, and me, my uncle, and Lawrence get out so we can talk to Chucky. Chucky goes right into what people are saying. It was a nail bomb. The word is it was the Irish and the Roofers Union as payback for us killing John McCullough. Right away, my uncle is shaking his head no. He says no fucking way an Irishman is killing the boss of a La Cosa Nostra family. They're crazy, but they're not that crazy. Not in a million fucking years. No way. So Chucky says, "Well, who do you think did it?" And my uncle says, "Well, it didn't come from New York. It didn't come from North Jersey. It didn't come from the Irish, and we didn't do it," meaning us guys in Atlantic City. "So it had to come from up here," meaning South Philadelphia. Just last night he was telling us about his problems with Chicky Narducci, so I'm guessing he has a hand in this. Then I said, "If Salvi gets wind of this, he'll kill Chicky right on the spot. He'll do it himself at the funeral. He won't give a fuck." My uncle says to me, "Chucky and Lawrence, we need to play dumb for now and see who does what, who lines up with who. We need to keep Salvi calm, and we need to find out exactly who did this, and then we will do what we gotta do." Meaning, kill them. So we get in the car and we drive over to the house, and Salvi is there with his sister and some members of his family. A few old-time guys that were around Phil Testa were also there. We get out and we pay our respects, and Salvi looked like he was ready to kill 1,000 guys. He said, "Nick, when I find out who did this, I'm doing them myself. I don't care who they are or who they're with." My uncle put his hands on his shoulder and looked him right in the eye and said, "We're going to get to the bottom of this, and whoever did this is going to get this." And he made the sign of the gun. "But we got to sit back and see who was involved in this treason. We can't do anything half-cocked." Salvi just nodded. While we're there, a lot of guys start coming around. guys like Joey Pungitori and Gino Milano, who were tight with Salvi. My uncle nudges me and says, "Look who's here, this treacherous cocksucker." And I look, and in comes Chicky Narducci with his sons Frank Jr. and Philip. They pay their respects to Salvi and his sister Maria, and then Chicky makes a beeline for my uncle. He says, "Nick, isn't this awful? Those no-good Irish motherfuckers did this to our friend." Now, my uncle knows that it's all bullshit about the Irish doing the killing, and he knows that in all likelihood, Chicky Narducci was behind it. He knows, but at this moment he doesn't know enough that he's so certain, and he wanted us to purposely play dumb. My uncle says to Chicky, "What can we do, Chick? We gotta wait and see what happens, just like with Ange." What my uncle was saying is, we gotta wait and see what New York says. And Chicky kind of nods, but he looks confused by what my uncle said. These guys like Chicky Narducci didn't get it. They thought they could pick who the new boss was, but only New York can do that, and my uncle was the only guy that New York would speak to. So we hang around the house for a little while, and my uncle tells Salvi, "We're going to be here for a few days for the wake and the funeral, and we'll get to the bottom of this." In the days following Philip Testa's murder, 3 names emerged as his likely successor: Testa's hand-picked underboss, Pete Casella, his trusted friend and consigliere, Nicodemo Little Nicky Scarfo, and a renegade mob soldier named Harry the Hunchback Ricobene. My uncle was small, but Harry Ricobene was smaller. He was like 4 feet 10 inches and weighed 110 pounds. We called him the Hunch because he had a hunchback. Him and my uncle had hated each other for years, but Harry had his own crew, and he was the main guy in southwest Philadelphia. They ran gambling, loan sharking, and extortion rackets like we did, but Harry and his crew were mainly known as drug dealers, and my uncle detested drugs and drug dealers, so that's one reason we didn't like him. The other reason was that Harry never showed anybody any respect, and that he didn't follow the rules. My uncle used to say, "The way he behaves, he's not Cosa Nostra." Now Pete Casella, who Phil Testa picked as his underboss, he too was a drug dealer. He had just gotten out of jail for selling drugs. My uncle was the one who had Mickey Coco killed for selling drugs to Frank Monte's kid. He always said, "Drugs and our thing," meaning La Cosa Nostra, "don't mix." Scarfo's blind allegiance to La Cosa Nostra's strict edict against getting involved in the distribution of drugs may have been admirable to some mob traditionalists, but rules were meant to be broken, and in fact, Harry Ricobene and Pete Casella weren't the only mobsters who moonlighted as drug dealers. Lucky Luciano, the architect of the national La Cosa Nostra syndicate and the first boss of bosses, was heavily involved with the distribution of drugs, as were his underboss, Vito Genovese, and Genovese's protege, Vincent the Chin Gigante, who shared a cell with the powerful mafia don inside the massive fortress-like federal penitentiary USP Atlanta following a 1959 conviction for heroin trafficking. Following the murder of Angelo Bruno and the shift in power on the commission, Vincent the Chin Gigante, the boss of the Genovese family, was now the boss of all bosses, the supreme leader of the commission. Scarfo knew that Gigante, whom he considered a personal friend, would nominate him over Casella and Ricobene. When Ange got killed, the Chin wanted my uncle to become the next boss, but my uncle declined and told them that Phil Testa deserved it more. The Chin, through Bobby Manna, then ordered Phil Testa to make my uncle the underboss, or consigliere, and my uncle became the consigliere. Testa's choice of Pete Casella as his underboss would ultimately cost him his life. Now, in the days leading up to Phil Testa's wake, we were in South Philadelphia every day. Me, my uncle, Chucky, and Lawrence. We were using a bar at 9th and Moyamensing called the 9M Bar, which was named after the streets it was on. From the time I knew Chucky, if he wasn't at his clubhouse on Shunk and Sarshan, you could find him at the 9M Bar. My uncle felt safe there. Now, at the time, the captains in the family were Freddie Aiezzi, Santo Idone, Joey Scafidi, Frank Monte, Johnny Capello, and Chicky Narducci. My uncle's captain before he became consigliere was Freddie Aiezzi, so we knew that he was with us. My uncle went way back with Santo Idone and Joe Scafidi, back to the Reds Caruso murder, so we knew that they were with us, and Frank Monte was very close with my uncle and Phil Testa. Remember, my uncle had Mickey Coco killed for selling drugs to Frank Monte's kid, so he was with us. We had everyone but Johnny Capello and Chicky Narducci. They were with Pete Casella. None of the captains were backing Harry Ricobene. My uncle had the support of 4 out of the 6 captains, and he knew he had New York support. But you gotta remember, not all these guys played by the rules. That's why Ange and Phil Testa were dead. So we go to the wake, and everybody's there, the whole organization. Members, associates, you name it. Everyone connected to La Cosa Nostra was there. While we were there, Chicky Narducci comes up to my uncle and says, "Nick, Pete Casella wants to see you after the wake to sort some things out. We want you to come to John Capello's house." Now John Capello, who was a captain, is Pete Casella's brother-in-law. His house is the house where I got made. These guys knew my uncle was making moves with the other captains, and my uncle was now almost certain that Pete Casella was in on the plot against Phil Testa with Chicky Narducci. So this is it. This is the other side wanting to sit down with my uncle. My uncle tells Chicky, "I'll be there. Me and Chucky will come." And Chicky says, "Good, we'll straighten things out." Now I'm standing there, and I'm hearing all of this, and I look Chicky Narducci dead in his eye, and I say, "I want Johnny Capello with me and Lawrence at the 9M bar as insurance. He leaves when my uncle and Chucky come back from the meeting. If anyone else but my uncle or Chucky walk through that door, John Capello will be dead before they get their guns out. Do you understand me?" Now Chicky is taken aback, and he has this stunned look on his face, and my uncle has half a smile on his face, like he's proud I spoke up, and says, "That's what it is. John Capello waits with my nephew until me and Chucky get back." Chicky kind of stammers a bit and says, "Okay, Nick, we just want to talk, that's it." And my uncle says, "Fine, we'll be there." When Chicky was walking away, I caught him giving me a look. I guess he felt that because he was a capo regime, I shouldn't have talked to him like that because I was just a soldier, and he was right. But if these guys weren't playing by the rules, why should I? I mean, Jesus Christ, they just whacked our boss out without approval from the commission, and he's going to give me the malocchio because he didn't like the way I spoke to him? My uncle sees what I'm seeing, and he says, "Your whole life, what have I told you about these ciggies? They are no fucking good. Greed and treason, that's all that's on their brain." Now my uncle moves right into action. He grabs Blackie Napoli, who was at the wake, and tells him to leave the wake and drive up to New York and set up a meeting with Bobby Manna for the next day, the day of the funeral, to discuss being named boss of the family. He told Blackie, "After you see Bobby, you turn around and drive back to the 9M and tell me what he said. You also tell him about this meeting at John Capello's house. I want him to know everything. We're not going back to Atlantic City until you come back. I don't care what time it is." Blackie says, "Got it," and he's out the door. My uncle tells Chucky, "Get 2 guns, one for Philip and one for Lawrence. I want a couple of guys with them at the 9M in case there's any trouble. I want everyone in that bar ready to go," meaning he wants everyone armed. Chucky says, "Okay, Nick," and he's out the door. My uncle looks at me and Lawrence and says, "This is it. You guys know what to do if there's any trouble." And we both nod. We left the wake and went straight to the 9M, and when we got there, Chucky was there with a few of his guys. We walk in and Chucky hands me and Lawrence pistols, and we sit at the bar and we're waiting for Johnny Capello. About a half hour later, here he comes, and when he comes in, Chucky frisked him for weapons. As Chucky is checking him, he raises his hands and looks at my uncle and says, "Come on, Nick, is this necessary?" And Chucky says, "He's clean." My uncle says, "It's just a precaution, John, that's all." And him and Chucky leave for the meeting. While we're sitting there, John Capello is trying to break the ice. He starts telling me and Lawrence the story about the Irish being behind Phil Testa's death. Me and Lawrence don't say nothing, and he's just talking, and I'm staring him dead in the eye as he's talking. I tell him, "You know, if something happens to my uncle or Chucky, you won't leave this bar alive. You know that, right?" And he looks at me and nods, and I say, "Let's have some drinks and see what happens." And after that, I don't think he said 2 words the rest of the night. Now, like I did with Chicky Narducci, I shouldn't be talking to John Capello like that. But I'm thinking he's with the guys who killed Phil Testa. In my mind, I was thinking that those guys would have killed me, my uncle, Chucky, Lawrence, Salvi, all of us. So in reality, I didn't give a fuck about none of them. On this day, the day of Phil Testa's wake, that was the first time in my life that I ever balked at the rules of La Cosa Nostra. So we're sitting there, and it seems like an eternity. A couple of guys were playing cards in one of the booths. A few more were watching TV. 2 guys were sitting on stools by the front door, and we had 2 guys outside the bar. Everybody had a pistol on them. Me and Lawrence were sitting at the bar with John Capello, and he started drinking. He knows his night's going to end one of 2 ways. Door number 1, he's going home. Door number 2, I'm putting 2 bullets in the back of his head. There ain't no door number 3. Me and Lawrence were milking our drinks because we had to stay alert in case there was trouble. It was very, very tense. The waiting became very monotonous, and this John Capello just keeps drinking as the hours pass by. All of a sudden, around midnight, the 2 guys by the front door are off of their stools, and they are walking towards the door. The guys playing cards are on their feet. Lawrence starts walking towards the door. I got my gun in John Capello's ribs, and the door opens, and in walks my uncle with Chucky behind him. I take the gun and put it back in my pants, and my uncle walks right over to John Capello and says, "Okay, John, you can go now." And this guy is out the door like Flash Gordon. Chucky tells the guys in his crew to stand outside, and that the only guy allowed in the bar is Blackie Napoli, who should be on his way back from New York with a message from Bobby Manna. Lawrence makes drinks for all of us, and we all toast, "Salud," and my uncle tells us about the meeting. When we got there, it was Pete Casella, his brother Anthony, that backstabbing cocksucker Chicky Narducci, John Grand and his son, and this kid Rocco Marinucci. They checked us for weapons right when we got there. Rocco Marinucci was looking out one of the windows and listening to a police scanner, and the rug in the room where we were meeting was rolled up. I think they were planning on blasting us, but they knew that you guys would have killed John Capello. Chucky says, "If you guys didn't have him here with guns on him, we wouldn't be sitting here talking right now." Lawrence chimed in and said, "Motherfuckers." And my uncle looks at me and says, "You caught Chicky off guard by asking for Pete's brother-in-law as insurance. If they had said no, then there wouldn't have been no meeting. They weren't going to kill us and let him die as a result, so they tried Plan B, which was to try and trick us. These fucking guys think I started doing this yesterday. These cocksuckers, we'll show them." My uncle says, "Pete Casella tells us that someone in New York told him that the Irish had killed Phil Testa and that he wanted me to retaliate." My uncle said Pete Casella was acting as if he was already the boss. My uncle says, "I told him, Pete, that's not what I heard, and I have a meeting set up for tomorrow in New York with Bobby Manna to tell him what I think is going on." Chucky says, "You should have seen their faces when Nicky said he had a meeting tomorrow with New York. The whole room got quiet, and that was the end of the meeting." So we're sitting there waiting on Blackie, and all of a sudden, around 2 a.m., here he comes. My uncle greets him with a hug and a kiss on the cheek when he comes in and says, "Well, how did it go?" Blackie says, "He wants you up there tomorrow for a sit-down," and my uncle tells him, "Me and you are going to go. We're going to have to miss the funeral, but this can't wait." Blackie says, "Okay, Nick, I'll see you tomorrow," and he leaves. This poor guy had driven 2 hours down for the wake, 2 hours up to New York to see Bobby Manna, 2 hours back to deliver the message, and now another 2 hours to get home. But that's how it was in this life. This wasn't a 9-to-5 job. Chucky and his guys walk me, my uncle, and Lawrence to our car just in case the other side decides to take a shot. But they didn't, and we drove back down to Atlantic City. When we get home, it's like 4 in the morning, and my uncle says, "Go upstairs and wake up Dutch. Tell him I need a car around the corner first thing in the morning." Dutch, as I will call him, was a guy that lived in our building and ran errands for us. We let him stay there for free and gave him $200 a week. He did odd jobs for Scarf Inc. and Nat, and he always helped out my mother or grandmother. He was a good guy, and we didn't involve him in anything illegal. So I go bang on his door and tell him what we needed, and he gets right up and gets a car and parks it a few blocks away on Florida Avenue, so my uncle can leave the back way through the alleys early the next morning without being detected. While guys like Nicky Narducci and Pete Casella were playing checkers, Nicky Scarfo and Philip Leonetti were playing chess. Each move was calculated and measured, and in March 1981, Little Nicky and Crazy Phil were one step away from running the entire Philadelphia Atlantic City mob. Scarfo had just turned 52, and in a matter of days, Leonetti would be 28. Scarfo's meeting scheduled the next day with his old pal from Yardville, Bobby Manna, was at this point merely a formality. The morning of the funeral, me and Lawrence get up early, and we're getting ready to go to Philadelphia. My uncle's up, and he's getting ready to head up to New York for his meeting with Blackie Napoli and Bobby Manna. He's going to go through the back alleys and get in the car Dutch had left for him so he doesn't pick up a tail. We were always careful, but going to New York you had to be extra careful. Guys like Bobby Manna and the Chin did everything top secret. So my uncle says, "Tonight when I get back, we will meet up for dinner. When you guys are up there today, keep your antennas up. I want to know who's saying what and who's gathering with who." As Philip Leonetti and Lawrence Merlino were on their way to Philadelphia for Phil Testa's funeral, Nicky Scarfo was on his way to North Jersey to meet with Blackie Napoli and Bobby Manna in the back room of an Italian restaurant in Hoboken to discuss the future of the Bruno crime family, and more specifically, Little Nicky's future as its boss. 10 years prior, the trio of Scarfo, Napoli, and Manna walked the track together at Yardville State Prison and discussed their future plans as mob leaders. My uncle was very tight with those guys, ever since they were in Yardville together. Scarfo told Manna everything he had learned about Phil Testa's death, the beef with Nicky Narducci, the rumors about the Irish, and his less-than-friendly meeting with Pete Casella the night of the wake. Scarfo told Manna that he believed Casella, Narducci, and others not yet known to him were behind Testa's murder. Manna told Scarfo that whoever had killed Philip Testa did not have the permission of the commission, and as such, the hit was unsanctioned. As it had done with the unsanctioned murder of Testa's predecessor, Angelo Bruno, the commission would launch an immediate investigation to identify those responsible and make arrangements to mete out the appropriate punishment: death. Sitting at the head of the commission was Manna's boss and Scarfo's friend and ally, Vincent the Chin Gigante. Manna told Scarfo that he would schedule a meeting in a week, and that both Scarfo and Casella would present their case to the Genovese hierarchy, which consisted of Gigante, Manna, and Anthony Fat Tony Salerno, the same individuals who presided over the investigation of Angelo Bruno's murder 1 year prior, and who had ordered the gruesome torture killings of those involved. This time around, the Genovese would be without their Minister of Manipulation, Frank Funzi Thierry, who was on his deathbed in a prison hospital after being convicted of racketeering and sentenced to 10 years in prison. With or without Thierry, the deck was heavily stacked in Scarfo's favor, and Little Nicky knew it. In 1 week, he would likely become the undisputed boss of the Philadelphia Atlantic City mob. That night, after his meeting with Blackie and Bobby Manna, me and my uncle went out to dinner at Caesar's. I told him about the funeral, and he told me about the meeting. He said, "For the next week, until I go to New York, we gotta watch our P's and Q's. We're gonna stay close to home. This treachery, it may not be over." For the next week, Scarfo and Leonetti stayed in Atlantic City and kept a low profile, shunning hastily called mob meetings in South Philadelphia and doing their best to avoid their usual haunts. Back when Ange was boss, and him and my uncle started having problems over the unions, we had heard that Ange had sent this big Irish guy from northeast Philly down to Atlantic City, and that this guy may have been looking to kill my uncle. We found out that he had a big tattoo on his arm, and a couple people in the neighborhood described him to us and said they had seen him around Georgia Avenue, and he was asking people questions about us. When my uncle found out about it, he went crazy. He knew someone who knew the guy, and he told them, "You tell that Irish motherfucker if he ever steps foot in Atlantic City again for any reason, I'm going to chop him up and send him back to Philadelphia in 6 trash bags, one for each of his arms, one for each of his legs, one for his torso, and one for that big stupid fucking Irish head of his." We never heard nothing about the guy from that point on. From that point on, everyone who came to Atlantic City checked in with us to let us know why they were in town. This is back when Ange was the boss. My uncle even told Ange, he said, "I'm going to cut your friend's arm off, the one with the tattoo, and I'm going to send it to you." I remember Ange was steaming, but so was my uncle. This was towards the end, before Ange got clipped. Him and my uncle were beefing over the unions. Now, several years later, with Scarfo on the cusp of assuming the throne, Atlantic City was crawling with wise guys, looking to curry favor with little Nicky. It's like overnight every guy and their mother wanted to come to Atlantic City and see my uncle for one reason or another. This is in the days leading up to the meeting in New York. It was me and Lawrence in the office, and we'd see this one and that one, whoever came. My uncle stayed upstairs in his apartment. He didn't come down to see anyone. They were all coming to score points, and we knew it. The day was finally here. It was finally time for the meeting with the Genovese leadership in New York. The meeting was set for 1 p.m., inside Vincent the Chin Gigante's personal headquarters, the Triangle Social Club on Sullivan Street in New York's Greenwich Village. Nicodemo, Little Nicky Scarfo, and Peter Pete Casella would sit before Gigante, his consigliere, Bobby Manna, and his front boss, Anthony Fat Tony Salerno, and learn their respective fates as Gigante, the il capo di tutti capi of the commission, dictated the future of the Philadelphia Atlantic City mob. Me and my uncle are up early, dressed and ready to go. I'm driving him to New York for his meeting with the Chin. In addition to getting him up there on time, I also had to make sure we didn't pick up any tails. The night before, I told Dutch to take his car and to drive it to the Parkway and get off at the 7N ramp. Me and my uncle were going to drive to the Parkway, and we were going to get off at 7S. The S is for south, and the N is for north. There is a sharp bend where 7S and 7N are running parallel to one another. I told Dutch to pull his car over like he was broken down right at the bend, next to the divider. Me and my uncle come around the bend, and there's Dutch, and his car is parked right where I told him, and it's running. We slow down, and we pull right up to the divider, parallel to his car. Me and my uncle jumped the divider and got in his car, and he jumped the divider and got in our car. The cops who were following us knew we were in the Cadillac, and that we were on the Parkway heading south. So they'd radio ahead, and another car would pick us up with the surveillance. That was how they did it, but we knew their moves. So now after the switch with Dutch, me and my uncle are in his car heading north on the Parkway, and Dutch is in our car heading south on the Parkway. I told him to go all the way to Cape May, which is the end of the Parkway, and turn around and come home. The cops would be following the caddy and have no idea we weren't in it. By the time they figured it out, we'd be in New York. Leonetti's plan worked. In addition to shaking a law enforcement tail, driving in a clean car gave Philip and his uncle an opportunity to talk freely for the nearly 2 hours it would take them to get to Greenwich Village. My uncle knew they were going to make him boss. I said, "You think they're going to do to Pete what they did to Tony?" Meaning kill him. And my uncle shrugged his shoulders and said, "If it was up to me, I'd kill Pete, his brother Anthony, his brother-in-law Johnny Capello, Chicky Narducci, and that fucking Rocco Marinucci. But it ain't up to me. It's up to this guy." And he stroked his chin, which is how we referred to the chin. As Scarfo and Leonetti got closer to New York, both men became more anxious, spotting in the distance the site of the World Trade Center's Twin Towers and the Empire State Building as they prepared to enter the city through the Holland Tunnel. Once we were in the city, my uncle started going over the protocol for the meeting. We were to first go to a restaurant in Little Italy, and then they would send for my uncle. He would go to the meeting, and I would stay at the restaurant. When we got there, we went into the restaurant, and the first guy we saw was Benny Eggs. Venero Benny Eggs Mangano was one of Chin Gigante's closest friends, and was the reputed underboss of the Genovese crime family. Benny Eggs said, "Nick, it's good to see you," and he gave my uncle a kiss on the cheek. My uncle said, "Ben, I want you to meet my nephew, Philip Leonetti. He is a friend of ours." And Benny shook my hand and gave me a kiss on the cheek and said, "So this is the young man I've heard so much about." He couldn't have been nicer to us. He tells us to have a seat, and right away they start bringing over food and drinks. He says to my uncle, "Let's wait a while for the other guy to get here, and then we'll get you over there," meaning the club where the chin was. As Scarfo, Leonetti, and Mangano made small talk, at 12:45 p.m., sharp, 3 Genovese soldiers walked into the restaurant, and Benny Eggs excused himself from the table. Now the meeting is scheduled for 1 o'clock. Me and my uncle get there at 12 o'clock, and here it's 12:45, and Pete Casella is nowhere to be found. My uncle checks his watch and whispers to me, "I'll bet you this cocksucker ain't gonna show," meaning Pete. I just made a face back at my uncle like, no way, because that was a major no-no. If you got called to a meeting with the boss of the commission and you didn't go, the penalty was death, no questions asked. So now Benny Eggs comes back and says, "I sent one of those fellows back to see what they want to do, if they want to get started or wait a bit longer for the other guy." My uncle said, "Doesn't matter to me, Ben, whatever you guys want." So 5 minutes later the guy comes back and whispers in Benny Eggs' ear, and he says to me and my uncle, "It may be a little while." Now we're just sitting there eating a little bit, having a couple of drinks, but this isn't the way it was supposed to be. All of a sudden all these thoughts are racing through my mind. Were we getting double-crossed, like Caponegro did? Was I going to wind up in the back of a car like Freddie Salerno? Maybe they were going to take us all out so they could have Atlantic City all to themselves. My uncle's sitting there, and I can see his antenna is up, but we can't talk because Benny Eggs is with us, and he's telling stories and making small talk. But I know my uncle is thinking the same thing. So, next thing you know, it's 3 o'clock. Now, my uncle knows the rules, and so do I. We're not going to say, "Hey, what's taking so long?" or "Is there a problem?" So we're just sitting there. What Scarfo and Leonetti did not know was that while Scarfo had his ace in the hole with Bobby Manna from their days together in Yardville State Prison, Pete Casella had made a similar connection with a powerful Genovese captain when the 2 men were doing time together on federal drug trafficking charges. At that very moment, the Genovese captain was pleading Casella's case to Gigante, Manna, and Salerno, trying to intervene on his behalf by either swaying the Genovese leaders to name Casella the new boss of the Philadelphia Atlantic City mob, or at a minimum, spare his life in the event Gigante was looking to make an example, like he did with Antonio Tony Bananas Caponegro. The whole time we're sitting there, the same guy who is running back and forth between Benny Eggs and the chin keeps coming and going, whispering to Benny each time he does. All of a sudden the door opens and here comes Pete Casella, and he has Rocco Marinucci with him. Benny gets up to greet him, and Pete introduces Rocco as a friend of mine, which means he's not Cosa Nostra, he's not made, and Benny's colors change and he won't shake Rocco's hand. "You can't bring him in here," Benny says to Pete, and one of the Genovese guys barked at Rocco, "Go wait in the car," and Rocco was out the door. He never looked back. It was almost 4 o'clock, and Pete didn't even get a chance to sit down, and the guy who was going back and forth all day reappeared and whispered to Benny, and Benny said, "Okay, gentlemen, they are ready for you." And my uncle and Pete were being escorted towards the door. Benny said, "Nick, I'm going to stay here with your nephew and teach him how to play cards." And we all laughed. Everyone except for Pete. Pete looked like he was scared to death. As Philip Leonetti and Benny Eggs Mangano played cards, Nicodemo Scarfo and Pete Casella were taken to the Triangle Social Club, which was only 3 blocks away. The windows on the nondescript storefront were completely blacked out, and inside there were 2 chairs, one for Scarfo and one for Casella. Sitting across from the 2 Philadelphia mobsters behind a table were the 3 Genovese leaders. Gigante was seated in the middle in his trademark bathrobe. The stone-faced Manna was to his left, and the dour-looking Salerno to his right, wearing his trademark fedora and puffing on a cigar that remained firmly between his teeth. According to Scarfo, who later told Leonetti what happened inside the meeting, Gigante wasted no time with pleasantries and started the meeting by speaking directly to Casella in his rapid-fire New York cadence. "Listen, we know what happened. Don't lie to us. If you lie to us, we can't help you. Tell us the names of everyone who was involved in this plot." Scarfo told Leonetti that Casella answered the question directly. "It was me. It was my idea. Me, Chicky Narducci, and Rocco Marinucci, and a kid Rocco knows." Scarfo said Fat Tony took the cigar out of his mouth and barked, "This motherless fuck, the kid. Does he have a name?" And Casella responded, "I don't know his name," and then hung his head in shame. Gigante smacked the table, and Casella looked up at him, and then the Don spoke. "You're finished. You are to retire immediately to Florida. You are forbidden from ever returning to Philadelphia. When you leave here, you get on a plane and you go. If you breathe a word of this to anyone, we will kill you, your brother, and your brother-in-law. Do you understand?" Casella nodded his head, and Gigante gestured for one of the Genovese soldiers to escort him out of the club. As Casella attempted to shake Gigante's hand, Gigante stared at him with disgust and spit on the floor in his direction, and Casella was whisked away. With Casella gone, it was just little Nicky and the 3 Genovese leaders. Again, Gigante got right to the point. "Well, Nick, I don't see no one else here, so I guess that makes you the new boss." At which point Gigante stood, and Scarfo approached the table and kissed Gigante on each cheek, as Manna and Salerno clapped their hands. Scarfo would also kiss Manna and Salerno in a similar fashion. Nicodemo Dominic Scarfo was now the undisputed boss of the Philadelphia Atlantic City mob. He had just turned 52 years old and was strategically aligned with New York's Genovese crime family and Vincent the Chin Gigante, the most powerful mob boss in the nationwide crime syndicate known as La Cosa Nostra, this thing of ours. The underworld in Philadelphia and Atlantic City would never be the same. That night, when Scarfo and Leonetti returned to Georgia Avenue, there was a small contingency waiting for them. It was Chucky, Lawrence, Salvi, and Frank Monty. I introduced my uncle to them as their new boss, and everyone was hugging each other and kissing each other on the cheek. The 5 of us went down to Angeloni's for drinks to celebrate. My uncle told us, "We gotta let things settle a bit before we start making changes. We gotta do it right. One step at a time. This is a whole new ball game." Everyone was happy, but it seemed like Salvi was a little out of it. I think he was expecting my uncle to say our first order of business is we're going to go kill this one or we're going to go kill that one, the guys who had killed his father. But my uncle was saying we're going to take things slow and let the smoke clear, which was definitely the right move for the organization. Nicky Scarfo enjoyed a steady stream of visitors to his Atlantic City headquarters over the next few weeks, as members and associates of the Bruno crime family came to pledge their allegiance to the new boss. Scarfo would also travel to Philadelphia and meet with the captains left over from the Bruno and Testa regimes to discuss the family's new hierarchy. Nicky Scarfo would name his close friend Salvatore Chucky Merlino as his underboss and Testa loyalist Frank Monty to the post of consigliere. Within a few short months, Scarfo would name 4 new caporegimes: Joseph Chicky Ciancalini, Salvatore Salvitesta, Lawrence Yogi Merlino, and his 28-year-old nephew, Philip Crazy Phil Leonetti. Scarfo kept his old captain, Alfred Freddie Iezzi, on board, but the old-timer was already semi-retired. Scarfo also kept Bruno-era captains, Big Santo Idone and Joseph Joe Scafidi in place, but took down Johnny Capello, the brother-in-law of the recently deposed Pete Casella. Scarfo also kept the treacherous Frank Chicky Narducci in place for the time being, but little Nicky had already decided that Narducci's days were numbered for his involvement in the bombing death of Philip Testa. Me, Chucky, and Lawrence were the only ones who knew what Pete Casella had told the Chin about the plot to kill Phil Testa. My uncle was afraid if Salvi knew, or even Frank Monti, that they would kill Chicky Narducci immediately. My uncle said, "We're going to kill him. We're just not going to kill him yet." As March turned into April, little Nicky and his new regime were in full swing, and business was good, and it was about to get a whole lot better. One day, me and my uncle are having lunch with Saul, Kane, and Lawrence, and Saul says, "Nick, I got an idea for you. You should start a street tax. The way it works is, you tax everybody who is doing anything illegal, and you offer them the protection and support of your family in exchange for them paying the tax. I know it's been done in Chicago and real big in New York in the 30s and 40s. I think you could make a lot of money doing it." My uncle's eyes lit up. He knew that we had the muscle to enforce it. He made a face at me, and I made a face back at him, and we both smiled. From that moment on, the imposition and collection of the street tax became our #1 priority and one of our biggest moneymakers. As Scarfo was setting out to restructure the organization, each made member had to formally come in and sit down with the boss and the underboss and talk about what they had going on. Guys had to come in and report what they had going on, who was doing what, so that we could figure out what was out there and what we were going to collect, both as tribute and as the street tax. A lot of guys hadn't been paying Ange or Phil Testa the right amount in tribute for years, and some guys weren't paying at all. My uncle told everybody that came in the same thing. Those days are over. You and your people are going to pay what you're supposed to pay, or it's this. And he made the sign of the gun. Scarfo had assembled a group of killers around him, and everyone knew it. Despite that, there were those in the underworld who did not heed the new boss's warning. A man like Chelsius Stevie Burrus, the leader of Philadelphia's Greek mob. Burrus had blatantly balked at Scarfo's demand that he be forced to pay the mob's new street tax, and Scarfo swiftly ordered his murder to send a message to anyone else considering not paying. My uncle had Long John set it up because he was close to Burrus. Raymond Long John Morterano, the one-time aide-de-camp to Angelo Bruno, who had helped Scarfo murder union boss John McCullough in December 1980, set up a dinner party at a restaurant in Philadelphia and invited Burrus to join him and his wife and several other people for a night out. Burrus brought his young girlfriend to the restaurant, and everyone was having a good time, until 2 men with ski masks entered the restaurant and motioned for Martirano and the others to move as they opened fire on Burrus, killing him with a barrage of bullets, and killing his young date, who got caught in the crossfire. The cold-blooded mob killing of Stevie Burrus sent the rest of the Philadelphia underworld scurrying to pay Scarfo's street tax, and Scarfo's crews were bringing in money, hand over fist. Once we got it going good, we were bringing in $100,000 per month, just in street tax money. Don't forget, we still had gambling, loan sharking, and extortion operations, so on a good month, we could bring in $500,000 or more in cash. With Scarfo and Leonetti based in Atlantic City, Salvatore Chucky Merlino and Salvi Testa were running the day-to-day operations of the family in South Philadelphia. Things were great in the beginning, especially after we killed Stevie Burrus. Everyone was doing their job, and we were making a lot of money. Everybody was paying. My uncle was happy, and things were good. But hanging over Scarfo's head in the summer of 1981 was an imminent prison sentence stemming from his conviction on gun possession charges in connection with the .22 that was found in his bedroom drawer during the police raid following the Falcone killing. As a convicted felon, Scarfo was facing several years in federal prison and was out on bail pending appeal. His lawyer, Bobby Simone, had told him that the appeal was a long shot, and that in all likelihood he would be in jail within the next 12 months. The looming jail sentence did not stop Scarfo from ordering the murder of a South Philadelphia drug dealer and loan shark named Johnny Calabrese on October 6, 1981, because, like Stevie Burris, Johnny Calabrese balked at paying the Scarfo mob's street tax. We approached Chicky Ciancalini, who was close with Calabrese, and he set it up. 2 guys from his crew, Tommy Del Giorno and Fafi Yanarella, were the shooters, and another guy named Pat Spirito was the getaway driver. As Chick was walking Calabrese to his car, Tommy and Fafi came out of an alley and blasted him. He died in the street. The Calabrese hit was the latest in a string of gangland murders that started with the Bruno killing less than 18 months before, and garnered both a lot of publicity from the local media and a lot of extra scrutiny from law enforcement. 3 weeks after the Calabrese killing, little Nicky turned his attention on an aging mob associate named Frankie Flowers D'Alfonso. Frankie Flowers wasn't a made guy. He was an associate, and he made a ton of money with Ange. They were involved in a lot of things together, both illegal and legal stuff. So when my uncle becomes boss, he sends for Flowers, and the guy doesn't come in. So my uncle tells Salvi, "I want you to give him a beating. Don't kill him, but shake him up. Make sure he knows that it's a new regime, and he is going to pay like everyone else." Scarfo knew that D'Alfonso was a huge earner, and Scarfo hoped that a beating at the hands of Salvi Testa would bring the old-timer around. Salvi and Gino Milano, who was one of Salvi's guys, set up a meeting with Flowers, and he falls for it, and is walking to the meeting, which was going to take place on the street in the 9th Street Italian Market in South Philadelphia. As he's walking, Salvi and Gino jump out from behind a car. Salvi has a baseball bat, and Gino has a steel bar, and they give Flowers a beating. They tuned him up pretty good. When an ambulance crew found D'Alfonso, he was semi-conscious and bleeding in the street. At the hospital, it was determined that his skull had been fractured, his jaw had been broken, several bones in his face were broken, and one of his kneecaps had been shattered. D'Alfonso would spend the next month in a South Philadelphia hospital recuperating. By the time he was out, it was almost Christmas, and Philadelphia's new mob don, Nicky Scarfo, decided to throw himself a party. There was a place on South Street called La Cucina that we used to go to. Sam the barber, who was with us, owned it. We rented the place out and threw a big party. Everyone in the family was there. You should have seen the spread. Shrimp, lobster, champagne, the best of everything. It was a great party. Everyone who came brought my uncle an envelope for Christmas. Some envelopes had a couple hundred in them, some had a couple thousand. By the end of the night, I think my uncle had made almost $100,000 just from the envelopes. Some guys would put a Christmas card in the envelope with a nice message for my uncle. He'd laugh as he was taking the cash out. He didn't give a fuck about the card or what they wrote. It was a shakedown. We weren't there to sing Christmas carols. Towards the end of the night, I'm sitting at a table with my uncle and Chucky, and my uncle motions for Salvi to come over. My uncle says to Salvi, "I think it's time." And Salvi says, "Time for what, Nick?" And my uncle says, "Your father." And Salvi's eyes get real big. My uncle says, "It's 2 guys." And he nods towards Chicky Narducci, who was standing a few feet away from us talking to some guys at the bar. "That's one of them. And the other one is the young kid with the pizza shop. Pete's friend." Salvi nods his head, and he's staring straight ahead in Chicky Narducci's direction, almost like he's in a trance. My uncle says, "You handle it how you see fit. I want you to do this for your father and for this family." Salvi's sitting there, and his eyes had welled up with tears, and he leans in and hugs my uncle and gives him a kiss on the cheek. He wiped his eyes and said, "Thank you, Nick." And he got up and boom, he's out the door. I think his emotions had gotten the best of him. Now, when my uncle became boss, he didn't come back to Philadelphia and tell everyone what Pete Casella had said at the meeting with the Chin about who was in on the Phil Testa murder. The word going around was that New York had given Pete Casella a pass, and that they had retired him to Florida and made my uncle the boss. That was it. That was the story. No one knew that Pete had given up Chicky and Rocco Marinucci, except for my uncle, and the only people he told were me, Chucky, and Lawrence. We knew, but no one else in the family knew. Now we're at the Christmas party, and my uncle tells Salvi, and he gives him the okay to kill both guys. It was a great way to end the year.